Huh, bud.
Hello, friends. Just me right now for the intro here. I just want to give you all a heads up or kind of like an update. So, obviously, for those who have been watching, we have been posting a lot. A lot of things have been happening. We've been having a little bit more technical difficulties with our videos and our recording process, and as well as just life gets busy and we just don't have a lot of time. As some of you may know, I am a father. I have a baby son, and moving forward, he might make a special appearance on some episodes. There might be some episodes where he doesn't, where I'm going to try to avoid that. There will be some times where he will be. In this particular episode, he will be making an appearance. So I do apologize if it is distracting or if it's a problem. But there's nothing really I can do. And honestly, being a dad, he's my son. I'm going to take care of him first over this podcast. But so there will be times for that. I just want to give you guys an update for the future. We have a couple amount of videos recorded and ready to go. I'm just in a process where I get off work after working 10 to 12 hours a day, and my weekends are packed with either doing recordings or just catching up on me time or just getting ready for the upcoming week for work. So life's just been busy. It's been very, very busy. So I just want to extend an apology for the lack of the podcast episodes, but rest assured they're coming out. We're still making them. We have some guest appearances, at least one episode with a guest appearance coming up from one of our other friends to talk about this video game series that we all deeply love. But for now, just enjoy the video. Thank you so much. I hope you guys understand, and take care. I also do want to add real quick before I go, the setup that you're seeing around my little box here now is actually our new setup, and so you guys get a little sneak peek of it. You won't see the setup for a couple episodes, but here it is. Hope you guys enjoy it. If you have any recommendations or suggestions, please let us know in the comments. We will take every criticism, every support. We'll take it all, and we'll adjust. You know, I'm not very tech savvy. I'm not very artsy, so I came up with this design myself. Like I said, we'll see if you guys like her.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Retrospective Gamers, a show where we just talk about all the things that we love about video games and why we have been doing it for so long. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Patrick, and today we have a very special topic for you because it's really truly retrospective about personally some of my favorite things about video games. But before we get there, Pat, what are you playing?
So, same old, same thing. I've been bouncing through a lot of games recently. But I finally, per last episode, I finally got the platinum for Immortal Phoenix Rising, so I have that done. It took a time, it was a grind, but I enjoyed my time with it, and that's all that mattered. Right now, I'm currently just trying to get through a lot of my downloaded games that I've had downloaded for a long time on my PlayStation, and right now that's Neo, the remastered complete edition to be exact, because I've already done the original Neo, and I got the plat for that. Came off the PS5. Love the game so much, decided just to do it all again, and I am loving it. I'm really close to finishing it, actually. I might go beyond and do the DLC because I have it for free. I haven't really decided yet. I don't know if I want to even do that, but we'll see. So right now it's just been Neo. If you don't know what Neo is, it's a Souls-like game. I would say the first really successful Souls-like game. It got a sequel. I would highly recommend it. It's really, really fun. It's engaging. It's got a lot more deeper mechanics than most Souls-like games have, and I really, really like it. It's one of those special type of games that just takes that formula from the Souls series and makes it better in a different kind of way. And the only thing it doesn't have is it doesn't have an ambiguous story. It gives you a story flat out. And that story, for lack of better terms, isn't that inspirational. It's just kind of okay. I don't really think highly of the story. It is what it is. But otherwise, it's a solid game. It's an incredible game. Love it.
All right, yeah, I remember really barely scratching the surface of that game.
Well, you didn't even get past the first boss, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
it's been one that I've always wanted to kind of go back to. I just never have. But yeah, no, that sounds good. It is a really fun game if you're interested in the Soulsborne genre. At least for me, it kind of did a lot of things. I wouldn't really say well, but it's a very interesting like system for that style of game, I think. So
for sure. No, there's a lot of cool little things about it, but
yeah, it's on PS4, PS5. I think the remastered collection is the PS5 version.
Yep.
If not, there's just the regular one on PS4.
Same for 2, because I have both.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so as far as what I've been playing, I've jumped into my kind of pre-game for Horizon Forbidden West, and so I've started up another a new playthrough of Horizon Zero Dawn. At first I was just gonna jump into like a new game plus save or everything, that way I can just blow through it all, but I decided to just start over completely fresh, but just put everything on, or put the difficulty to easy, that way I can still kind of just make through things quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of just wanted to really just dive back into everything like that the first game offered, and kind of like see some of the little like intricacies of like the characters and factions and all that. Yeah, I mean, I still have over a month to play it before the second game comes out, so I've been kind of just taking things slow and kind of just having fun with it. Like, last time I played, I literally just got to Meridian and starting to look for Aaron's sister and all that. So, I'm not too far into it, but probably over the next couple weeks, I'm gonna really blow through it.
Right.
But yeah, that's really the only major thing I've been playing. Other than that, it's just kind of just random games where I really don't feel like playing Horizon, I'll jump into. But yeah, so it's about what we've been getting into this past week since our last episode. So with that, I guess we can just go ahead and jump right into our topic. And so today's kind of like I said, it's a really truly retrospective one, because as you guys have seen, that we're both, heads first into RPGs, and really just like a lot of like story-based games and all that. And a lot of these games, of course, the meat of the game comes down to the characters. They're a lot of the times what really drives the game, especially with RPGs where you kind of have like a team around you, or a little squad. A lot of the times it's those interactions between your like squad mates and crew members that really drives the story along and fleshes out the characters. And so today what we're going to be doing is we've each selected 5 characters that we've just really loved, or just some that we felt like we can talk about today. And there was no like rules as far as who we can pick. It was just, whatever 5 characters that you've always just been really interested in, just go ahead and talk about them. And so let's just go ahead. I'll start with your first one.
All right. These are in no real particular order. I don't have like this is my favorite of all time. These are just characters that I look at and I think I fondly think of. But not a ton of curveballs. Funnily enough, all mine are main characters, so side characters really don't have an effect on me here, except for one. But he's like, the one is kind of like this main role player in the story. But so I guess I'll just start easy with a character that I've always loved, and I've come to love even more with the better understanding of storytelling and story structure and plot devices and character development, and seeing how just completely tonally accurate this character is. Comes from my favorite game of all time, which is Final Fantasy X, and the character is Tidus. Tidus is a He's a very relatable. He's confident. He's headstrong. I wrote down that he sacrifices his chance to be real and allow himself to be free so that people he was never meant to make could live and go on. He's optimistic and encouraging and relentless. He's just a character that he's the type of character that I grew up wanting to be. You know, he's like the sports star. He's the athlete. He's Mr. Popular. He's got confidence. He's got charisma. But he turned out to be, at the end of the story, he turns out to be someone who I ended up being, which is something that I look at and I just appreciate and I look fondly at. And I think that it took years of understanding and playing the game and getting into the character to really connect that to myself personally on that personal level, that Tidus is a character that I wanted to be, but he ended up being the person I came out to be. So it's kind of a reverse order thing. Not that I could have an influence on any type of character, fictional character, but I like to think it that way, that he turned out to be the type of person that I end up being because of that. And I give him a lot of credit to me on my journey as for personal growth. And I just think that he's just an all-around just special character, you know. He gets a lot of beef for like the fact that, oh, he's so childish and he acts like a kid, and it's like, well, he's a 17-year-old. Were you any better at 17? Realistically, he's a 17-year-old. He's his father left him at a very young age, and he didn't have that in his life for a long time, for at least like, I don't know, maybe 10 12 years or so, maybe even longer, and having to reconnect with that, and having to, again, if you play the game, you know the consequences of having to deal with that. And there's just a lot of cool things that go with Tidus as a character. I think he fits the role really good as an audience surrogate for the story. But he does it in a way where he still has charisma, he's still charismatic, and he's not just a blank slate where the players have to write him on. He's his own person while being a surrogate for audience members. Kind of like the opposite of Harry Potter, essentially, where in the first Harry Potter, he was just the surrogate and we experienced the world and the story through him, but he had no character himself. That's kind of the opposite effect that Tidus has with Final Fantasy X.
Okay, yeah, that's a perfect start, actually. I'm kind of glad I started with you. But yeah, so that's great. That was when I had originally pitched this one to you. I kind of figured he was going to end up on the list somewhere.
He almost didn't, but he almost did.
Yeah, there was literally right before we started, I decided to switch around a character on my list because I honestly felt like it was kind of cheating. But
I decided to pick instead of being nuanced, I decided to pick characters that I just indulge in and that I love truly with their values and how they are as a person. And just their stories and the things they've gone through and how they've grown, and just the sacrifices they made for the greater good. I think that's like a big thing that I've enjoyed with these characters that I have on my list. But originally there was some characters on here where I didn't even put on because I was trying to, again, be nuanced and be like higher thinking, when that doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. That's on there for me. I could add a ton more characters, but so that's just my, again, these aren't in any particular order. Tidus might be up there probably for number one, but I'm not gonna, I don't know, there's too many characters out there to really sit down and do this, so this is in no particular order.
Yeah, no, same with mine. I just have basically the way I'm going down my list is really just kind of the first characters that I thought of that I wanted to talk about.
I know Tidus was last. I put Tidus last on my list. It wasn't the first one. The first one I thought of is gonna be a real head turner, I think, for some people.
Okay.
Probably for you too. Well, not for you because you don't know who he is, but
okay. I'm excited to see that one. So I'll just go ahead and get into my first one if you're all settled with Tidus.
Yeah, yep.
All right, so my first one is kind of a weird like
Oh.
find like characteristics for the character before you get into the game, but a lot of their story is formed by the way the player kind of goes through the game and kind of figures out their journey. And so this character that I'm going to talk about first is actually the Courier from Fallout New Vegas. So I think I've mentioned, well, maybe not with the episodes that are coming out or are coming out, but I'm a huge Fallout fan.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, my story with Fallout is I played Fallout 3 first, and I actually didn't really care for it all that much. Like, it was fun and all that, but I was just like, okay, it's a, apocalyptic shooting RPG. It's, it's got its, the things that made its name are there, but I didn't really see it. And actually, if I remember right, Fallout 3 was the first Bethesda Fallout, if I'm not mistaken. But then another game in the series came out developed by Obsidian, and that one was New Vegas. And I don't know what it was with New Vegas, but as soon as I started playing it, I just dove right in. I think it was mostly because the game was set in kind of like the California, like Nevada border, so it was kind of like a little bit of a familiar territory for me, compared to Fallout 3 being set in DC. But the kind of funny thing is me playing through and loving New Vegas kind of gave me another new love for Fallout 3, because now I really love that game too. But as far as the Courier, he's you can name the character and all that, but for the most of the game, he's just referred to as the Courier because, well, that's what he does. Is in this new world of Fallout, he's hired by a company called the Mojave Express, and he just delivers packages, and that's about it. And the game starts off with you with the Courier being kind of surrounded by these three guys, one of them named Benny. Mm-hmm. And the Courier's delivering this thing called the Platinum Chip to New Vegas. And it was kind of like a package that he just picked up as one of those, like, oh, it's just another part of the job, whatever. He had no idea what it was, what it actually did. And all of a sudden, he's got this guy named Benny telling him, like, oh, the game is over, whatever, and just straight shoots him in the head right off the spot. And so, starting a game with your character understandably probably being killed, I was just like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then the game goes up to you essentially being revived, and that's where the journey starts. And kind of a lot of the things that I really appreciate about the characters, really just the freedom that Obsidian gave you to form the character. Like, I remember it was one of the first times where I really was able to dive into a game with the headspace of if I was in this situation, what would I do?
Mm-hmm.
And the game also does a lot of really interesting things where your character, if you align with certain factions, and the ones that they're against automatically hate you and all that. And it's just a really interesting story for that character. One of my little favorite bits about it is you can kind of just contradict yourself a lot going through the game, because you can tell one person that oh, I don't know what that is, and then 5 minutes later tell someone that you know everything about it. And you can really just form your character story, because for a while their main thing was oh, I'm just a courier or whatever, but you can tell people oh, I used to be a bounty hunter, and I used to do this, and I used to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And
you make the character essentially. That's all.
Yeah, it is. You make the character as you go along the game, and I just really love that about the character, because it really just allows the player to put themselves in the shoes of the character, and that's something that I always really enjoy with playing games. And
that's true for a lot of Fallout games. Pretty much all Fallout games, there isn't a personalized character. It's someone you make yourself. That's right. With the Elder Scrolls games, they don't really have a character or characteristics themselves. It's just how you enable them to have that personality.
Right, because one of the really predefined things about the Courier that came about was actually through the DLC Lonesome Roads, where you go to, or I think it's just Lonesome Road actually, but you go to this place called the Divide, which was basically destroyed by another nuclear explosion that happens after all the nukes and everything that start off the universe of the Fallout lore. And you come across this character named Ulysses, who you find out was actually another courier just like your character. But
Mm-hmm.
in the start of, or at least before the start of New Vegas, Ulysses was actually the one that was supposed to deliver the platinum chip. But the story goes that he sees your character's name like on the list of like potential carriers or whatever, and he completely drops the job and tells people make sure you give it to that person.
Mm-hmm.
And what you end up later finding out as you play through the DLC is that the courier once made a delivery to the place that became known as the Divide,
Mm-hmm.
and that package, which the courier had absolutely no idea what it was, he was just taking it because it was a job. But once he delivers it to the Divide and leaves, there was technology in that package that inadvertently sets off a nuke and destroys the Divide. And so the big like bulk of the Lonesome Road DLC is kind of Ulysses like wanting to punish your character for being responsible for like the destruction and everything, even though you obviously had no idea what you were actually delivering. But yeah, the Courier is kind of one of those just first people where I really like truly enjoyed being able to like form the character as you go along instead of like being given like a preset character with like a certain like backstory and all that. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing wrong with that. There's plenty of absolutely amazing characters that came out of that creation process, but yeah, I just really love being able to like kind of just create your character story as you go along.
I think that that's like a really easy answer for this question, as like what's your favorite character is the one you make yourself. So yeah, that's I think that's universal. I think everyone will agree with, because I would say like for Skyrim, I like making my own character,
Mm-hmm.
making his own personality and mannerisms, and like that's simple, that's easy, to I think that even with like Oblivion
Right.
or even Elder Scrolls Online or any of those types of build your own character game and make their own destiny. I think I would say Fallout 4 did it better because they really had their own personality and they were very
Mm-hmm.
limited with their mannerisms for certain scenes and cutscenes and whatnot. But what you do as the character's actions is completely up to you. But I think that there's a lot of good things for it, but a lot of just like, I don't know, emptiness as well to it, because you have to do all the work where the writers could have done so. But for Fallout and Elder Scrolls and such games like that, it makes more sense that you make the character and you build the story. But no, that's good. I think you picked a good one. I think it's a popular one. I think it's a simplistic one too, where it's like the no named, the no one, the
Mm-hmm.
people no one really cares about, the messenger. That's neato. I
Yeah.
guess I'll do my second one then. So this one, if you know me, this was obviously not going to be a surprise to anyone, especially to you. It's another JRPG character, one I'm very, very much in love with, one who I have also modeled my own personality after because of how he is and his personality, and I think that he is just this all-around motivational, inspirational, heartwarming character, and that is good old boy Sora from Kingdom Hearts, the full series. Sora has gone through a lot of ups and downs in his journey throughout the series, and just to watch him grow and grow up, I look at him like this is like someone who I've idolized and looked at. Again, he's also a young. He started his journey at 14. He's now about 16 years old in the timeline, and I just fully engulf myself with this character. This is another character who is he's light, he's heartwarming, he never gives up. That's the biggest takeaway I have for him. He's a person you could live up to. He's always kind of nice, he always loves to make friends. He's always adventurous. He never backs down. He's confident only when he has to be. He's aggressive only when he has to be. And he's a very protective person for his friends and his family, or his friends who he considers his family at this point. And he is just a character that, again, the whole never giving up thing is a huge thing. There's the scene in Kingdom Hearts 1 where he loses the Keyblade to Riku, because the Keyblade was originally supposed to be for Riku. And he gets the wooden sword, and Beast says, like, oh, I'm going to keep fighting because I have something worth fighting for. Sora stands up, takes the wooden sword, and he says the same thing, like, I got something worth fighting for too. I'm not just going to give up just because I don't have a weapon. And of course, he has the iconic line, I know now I don't need a weapon. My friends are my power. And that kind of says it all. He is a very enriching character, an enduring character, and I appreciate him so much for that. And he's just a character that I will always look at and say, you are like the definitive video game character for me. You influence my life and personality. That he's like the character that Tidus ends up becoming, and I think that's where I get it from. But I've always related to Sora a lot. I think that it's, you know, let me get him. I'll take a pause. Hey, bud, what's wrong? There you go.
Yeah, so I'll just go ahead and step in while Patrick does his thing. Originally, I kind of had an idea to talk about Sora, but I figured Pat would put him on his list because he's arguably a much bigger fan of Kingdom Hearts than I am. But yeah, like I always appreciated Sora's like almost like unending optimism, no matter like what odds he's in, because you know he's like we see in the beginning of Kingdom Hearts, like he's just this little 14-year-old kid on an island with his friends, and then all of a sudden like both of his friends like go missing, and he ends up in this completely random like place somewhere, and he ends up with basically a talking dog and a talking duck and just rolls with it. But yeah, like Kingdom Hearts and Sora as a character, like I've always just appreciated that like constant like optimism and never wanting to give up, like no matter how bad things are.
Yeah.
I think really one of like my most favorite like kind of journeys of his is just both Kingdom Hearts and Kingdom Hearts 2 and then Kingdom Hearts 3, and 3 especially, where it's when Xehanort's basically just about to unlock Kingdom Hearts, and he literally just saw Kairi die right in front of him, more or less. And just that instant like second where he's anything like that should destroy like anybody, but his first reaction is literally just throw himself at Xehanort and do whatever he can to try to stop it at this point. And like I've just always really appreciated like just his strengths as like a person and a character.
I would say his best performance as a character is from Chain of Memories. I think that's when he really goes through his toughest challenge. That's why I like the game as my favorite Kingdom Hearts game. Is just he goes through this insane like emotional breakthrough, and he really redefines himself as a character. And of course with Kingdom Hearts 3, yeah, there's a lot of good things there too, and he makes the big sacrifice, that no one wants him to, but he does it because it's for, his whole purpose and his whole quest really is to, Kairi is basically the love interest, and he wants to sacrifice himself, and he wants to protect her, and he'll do it at any cost because that's just the type of character he is. He is there's only one way to do this, then I'm going to do it regardless. And whereas all the other characters are very more thought provokers, not jump into action type characters. They're very much like, oh, let's think of another plan or another way. And Sora's like, if this is a guarantee win, I'm going to do it, even if it means I'm sacrificing myself. And, that's something I've always admired. It's just that confidence and bravado. I think just my favorite thing is he's just so friendly. Like whenever he meets all the Disney characters and he goes to different worlds, he's never a jackass. He's always, he reads the situation and plays off the situation. If someone doesn't seem hostile, he's always friendly. He's always trying to save people and always trying to just be the better person. And though he is a kid and he has a lot to learn, I think that that's a big part of his character for sure.
Yeah, that's exactly why I said you'd be better off the one to describe his character than I am. But I don't know if there's anything else you would like to say, or if I can just go ahead and jump to my next character.
Not really. I think the only thing would be for like Recoded is it's a completely different version of Sora, but even that completely different version of Sora, that fake data version of Sora is still holds that, and he goes through a lot of personal growth in that one too to learn how to understand pain. And I think that's a really important tagline for Sora is understanding suffering and pain of other people. But I think that's really it. I mean, that just goes kind of with everything else.
We'll go ahead and get into my next one then. So
Do it.
my next character, I've actually already sort of talked about I've already talked about the game they're from, and so without any more teasing, my next character is Aloy from the Horizon Zero Dawn and now the coming Forbidden West sequel.
Right.
Yeah, like when Horizon like first got shown off and all that, I was in deep with it. Like I really just loved like the aspect of like the robot, like dinosaur looking like creatures, and then just this lone hunter kind of going at it with them. And once I started playing it, I pretty much almost like fell in love with the game and Aloy as a character. Like almost immediately, she's very like headstrong and strong-willed. She doesn't let really anything in that world stop her. And kind of like one of her defining things is that in the game she comes from what are called the Nora tribe, which are kind of like the almost like Native American like equivalent in this new world. And they worship this mountain called the All Mother Mountain, where in kind of the story of the game is where they're supposed to like All Mother stop the Metal Devils from taking over the world and all that, more or less. And after some time, the Nora tribe, like a lot of their values, like are centered on like the mothers of the tribe and everything, and the matriarchs end up finding Aloy as a baby, like on the outside of like this giant metal door in the mountain, and they kind of like freak out, thinking like, oh, this is a motherless like child. Where did she come from? Who is she? And so their
Right. Yeah.
instant thing is to just exile her and basically put her in the treatment of a death seeker named Rost, who basically kind of like self-imposed his exile on him. And just because Aloy was given to him, she's automatically deemed an outcast of the Nora tribe. And so she kind of grows up just with the only human connection being her father figure, Rost. And every time she, like, as a child, kind of gets in or interacts with like other like Nora tribes people, they always like shun her, like are always like kind of telling like, oh, you're not good enough, you're nothing, and all this.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, kind of we see in the game once Aloy takes on like the proving and becomes a seeker. Even then, like some of the Nora tribe like still like shun her and kind of see her as the outcast. And kind of like just one of the things I always appreciate is just like I always felt like she's a very, very strong female character, because it's not like, oh, what am I gonna do? I need help. It's just like, no, I can do this by myself. I don't need anybody. And she's compassionate, logical, or very like she's tough to people. But of course, that becomes player choice on some of like the few dialogue options that we are given throughout the game.
Right. Yeah.
And so I really like loved her journey of her just trying to figure out like who she actually is and who her mother is, and of which we end up finding out that she's actually a clone. But yeah, I just really like her character, and I just love everything about her. I think for people that just want like a very strong character, or you maybe wouldn't typically find it, she's a very good option for exploring that. But yeah, I'm just very excited to see where the sequel takes her, and kind of if there's any improvements or advancements on like her character as a whole, and some of the things that she thinks or does like throughout her journey.
Yeah. I don't really have a lot to say about Aloy. I think that she's definitely one of those characters that's really impactful in the video game spectrum in the world. I just think that, Aloy has some, definitely has some beats to her that improve her character. I just get frustrated with the game in general, with its story and its world building and the side characters, really. It makes me, I feel like some stuff that some of the side characters say and the responses you get, they kind of contradict her as a character, which becomes frustrating to play as. But I think aside from all that, she's still a very solid character. She's become a PlayStation icon, which is the impressive part about it.
Mm-hmm.
She is a staple character now. And while I'll have my gripes with the game and how it's just frustrating to do certain things and to take upon certain actions, it, I don't know, kind of holds her back a little bit for me personally. But no, she's a solid character. She's definitely like top tier character as far as her personal story outside of the side characters and the the NPC characters and whatnot. I think that there's a lot of good, but it could be relatively better, and that's just, again, my humblest personal opinion on that. But
yeah, no, I can see a lot of that. Like in some of my previous playthroughs, I've noticed some of like the weird things that occur like throughout dialogue and interactions with other characters. But overall, I really appreciated what Guerrilla did with the character, and them turning from doing Killzone for years and kind of just taking on this open world action RPG, and then
for sure, yeah,
and then for the main character to literally become an icon for the brand that they produce for it. It's a very strong start for the character.
Oh, easily. Yeah, it's a very different type of game too. It's fun to play. I just have a lot of issues with the story structure and that kind of stuff. But for the first jab at it, it's not a bad job. I think that the most grand populace of it loves it, so I can't really say much. But I don't know. There's some stuff just didn't do it for me. It just felt contradictory. Otherwise, solid character. I like it. So next one that I have is another one. Now this is going to be the opposite. Whereas Horizon was praised, this game was not praised. And I feel like I'm part of the 1% of players that loves this game. It is still my favorite in the series, and it is just an absolute gem for me personally. That is Connor from Assassin's Creed 3. So Connor is this Native American turned assassin from Assassin's Creed 3. He aligns himself with the qualities of and the mindset of truth and justice. He's the type of character who he defends his culture while being open to progress and never gives up on your values or principles for victory. There's a lot of times where he has a lot of push and pull with the natives, but he has more push and pull with the colonials, even though he sides more with the colonials in the pursuit of freedom, but it's also in the pursuit of protecting his own people. I think that Connor has a lot of values that he doesn't sacrifice for, even if it means for the greater good. He's a very to himself character. He's always about protecting his kind and his people. And to those who he's kind to and who are kind in return, he will always send out a helping hand. And I think that's really important. He doesn't just follow blindly into following the Assassin's Code. He's very against the Assassin's Code, which is something I love about him. And he doesn't sacrifice his values to be an assassin. He sticks to his values, he sticks to his culture, and it's a very inspirational take on an Assassin's Creed character, whereas the rest of them have been like with Ezio, he just kind of jumps into it and just says, okay, this is my life now, this is who I am, I'm going to change who I am because of this, and become just fully devoted to this thing. And he completely changes his character, whereas Connor sticks to his values and doesn't change who he is, but still takes on the assassin's title. And I know the game definitely didn't get a good rap. I'm personally a big fan of it. It is still my favorite. I will die on that hill. I think just the aesthetic of the game is pleasing. I love the it's not super open. It's kind of linear, but it's kind of going but in between on those two things. And that's another game that I love dearly. And Connor's another character that I look at and just think, just the highest praise for. He just is a character who's well defined. By the end of the game, when he cuts his hair to have his signature mohawk style haircut like his people have, I think it's very inspirational that he's able to bring his culture into this new way of thinking and this new lifestyle and make it his own. And I think that's a big thing that the Assassin's Creed series really hasn't done. I think the only character to rival that would be Edward, who would technically be Connor's great grandfather, or grandfather actually, and where he doesn't live the life of an assassin. He just steals the identity of one and just plunders like a pilot like he normally does, but with the assets of the assassins. Where he has his own defining. He doesn't let the assassins. He lets the assassins enhance his personality. But Connor really just sticks to his values and his beliefs and his principles without sacrificing it to become an assassin. I think that's really inspirational for an Assassin's Creed story. I think it just works well for me personally, and he's just a character that I love a lot. He's a very good character in my eyes.
Yeah, no, Connor's journey throughout Assassin's Creed kind of easily makes that probably my favorite game of the series, just because we go through someone who or we see someone that, in the start really doesn't care about anything the assassins are or what they stand for. All he's more interested in is kind of just getting revenge for his people and kind of losing everything that, or at least more or less losing everything that he loved, and then later finding out that it was actually his father was the one responsible for it. So seeing his journey through it all and really just developed to become the assassin that he later does become anyway. I think it's just I really appreciate everything about it, because he takes it with both views of kind of learning all the things that I think Achilles teaches him. I think that was his name.
Yeah.
And who of course Achilles is the former assassin that essentially kind of just brings hands down everything that he once used to Connor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just that whole dynamic between Achilles and Connor was kind of a lot of the best parts of the game, because we see obviously Achilles understands a lot of the things that Connor's coming from, and kind of a lot of his rage and why he wants to fight and all that. And Achilles is kind of the one that reins him in and teaches him if you want to accomplish your mission and everything, this is what you need to do. And just really seeing Connor kind of just combine this new life the new life with his old one, was I just really loved that characterization that they did for him, and he's easily one of the best characters out of the series.
Yeah, for sure. I think that I loved a lot of pushback with Achilles. They don't really cooperate a lot of the time, and I appreciate that a lot, because it's just very different from that mentor-student type relationship that we've seen, where he still respects him, but he's not gonna sacrifice his values or beliefs with his own culture as being a Native American in order to get to the point of where he needs to be to help the colonial side beat the British to win in the Revolutionary War. But I don't know. I know that the game didn't get crazy love, and it doesn't nowadays. It's the type of game that hasn't aged well, but personally, it's, again, I will die on the hill. And with the character too, he is a top tier character in my books, at least. I think he has just a lot of the things I value in people and humanity, and I think that we can learn a lot from him. Whereas, that's just my take on it.
Yeah, that's really great retrospective on that character. But yeah, so with that, I guess I can go ahead and jump into my number 3.
Go for it.
And this one was kind of like an almost immediate add to the list, even though I've really only known the character truly for about 2 months now. And it is actually Bigby Wolf from Tall Tales The Wolf Among Us. Um, so The Wolf Among Us was one of Tall Tales' first kind of like bigger games. It's one of the ones where like, you know, anybody would play like the Walking Deads and the Batmans and all that, and always hear like, oh, go play the Wolf Among Us. I'm like, go play that, and it was just like, okay. And it was really until you and our friend Preston was really like pushing me on it to go play it. I decided to jump in, and so the Wolf Among Us is set in a alternate 1980s New York where a lot of like the classic like fable characters such as like Sleeping Beauty and Little Red Riding Hood and like just a lot of those like fable characters are given a place in New York to kind of like become human and try to live like normal lives, or at least normal human lives. And Bigby, who is actually the big bad wolf, is the sheriff of what's called Fabletown. And basically, he takes the job because it's one of those things where it's like, oh, nobody else was going to do it, so I guess I should. And he's kind of like, as we see throughout like a lot of his interactions with a lot of characters, like not a lot of people like him all that much. He's kind of like a hard ass, and he's like very tough on people. And he's kind of like one of those like, it's the law and you got to follow it, and I'm the one enforcing it. So do you really want to try to push me? And this kind of falls in line with the Courier pick, because really in the game you can kind of form a lot of like Bigby's like character like interactions and the way he eventually like kind of becomes his own character throughout the series. But like I've always kind of, at least the way that I did it, the kind of story that I got was, you know, each character that have become human, they do it through the use of glamours, which is basically like a magical spell where it alters the person's like physical look to match, or to be able to like blend in with like the humans of New York and all that. Well, no one will really like second guess them. And kind of we see throughout the story that Bigby has one of like the government glamours or whatever, where it's kind of like it's a much stronger version and it usually holds, but we see multiple points where, you know, like when he gets like just into fights or just gets angry at people, like he'll start to break the glamour, become the wolf again. And kind of like one of the things that I really appreciated about the character is like he's really just trying to like put being the big bad wolf and just that whole wolf like persona into his past. And like he just wants to be like the regular sheriff, like running a town or whatever.
Right.
And so I just really appreciated like often seeing how like he's the type where, you know, the times where he does break, he kind of does it like, well, I had no other choice, what do you want me to do? And you get Snow White, who's basically like the deputy like district attorney kind of thing. And if you follow along in the Fables graphic novels, which are what the game is based on, eventually becomes Bigby's wife.
Yeah.
But she's always like pushing on him like, no, you got to leave that behind, that's not the kind of person you are anymore. And just kind of like seeing him like struggling with that, really trying to be like just the sheriff where anybody can go to like to get things handled, but also having to deal with, you know, his past. And we get that a lot with the interactions we get with the woodsman, who in the backstory is kind of like his arch nemesis. They're the one that always fight, and like the woodsman is the one that kind of just protects Little Red Riding Hood from the big bad wolf. And you see in the game that, you know, they're kind of also trying to put that behind him. Of course, the woodsman, he kind of holds on to it because like, oh, that's, you know, the person that I love being, and like now look who I am now. And Bigby's like, well, that's the past, we just got to, you know, move on and try to, you know, make something new for ourselves. Like I think kind of just that whole mindset of, you know, giving up on, you know, when things were normal to them and getting adjusted to like a whole new life. Like I just really appreciated like the mindset that Bigby has as a character, and kind of what we see him do throughout the game, which is of course our own like decisions as players. But no, I just think he was very well written, and his kind of character arc was very well directed on whoever's part that was. Um, but yeah, no, he's just a very great character. He's a big reason why I want to jump into the graphic novels and kind of see how his story plays out later on, because of course the game is a prequel to the comics,
Right.
and I'm excited to see what they do with the second one, if it ever actually does come out at this point.
I think not like announced. I think they have announced it.
Yeah,
I think it's still in development. So
yeah, it's a team, or a former team of Telltale developers that I don't know if they're still going under the Telltale name or if they have a new one, but
they probably are doing, because there's still a new Telltale game coming out.
yeah.
So
And
there's a new one that's coming out under that. So I mean, with all the information about the company we have, I think they're still very much producing and having their name be used still. So, Bigby is, I think Bigby's a great character. I think that this is a game that it's worth playing and experiencing. I think you really hit the mark with him, wanting to be something different than what he is known as. I think one thing I'm going to add is these characters predominantly have lived for ever, essentially, since they were first, created. And they always make references to, oh, you're just the big bad wolf, and I think that gets under his skin a lot. And I think that's more of like what the draw is, rather than him just being like a hard ass, because he is just doing his job. And the people in the game respect that he's doing his job, but they always like to get under his skin and just remind him that he is the bad guy. He's never predominantly the good guy. And I think that's a big part of it. I think Bigby, especially depending on the choices you make, like if you make, the choices that you think he should follow, if that is his character, then it makes sense. Like there's options to spare people or to hit people. And some things I often went with the depending on the situation, I always spared everyone. Like I didn't rip the guy's arm off, I didn't hit the guy, I only instigated a type of violent action when it was warranted, like if I got shot point blank at and stuff, because they've made constant references like the Axemen tearing him in half, cutting him open and stuff. And it's like, how do you survive that? It's just because they're magical.
Yeah.
And so these characters have been around for a long time. I think that's the point that should be stated. That these characters have always tried to break away from all their, like, their stereotypical characters. Like Beast is always like the hard-ass guy who doesn't trust anyone. Snow White is the person that's always caring and trustworthy, and puts her trust in people a little bit too much. And I think there's a lot of great things that comes with those characters in this game. It's a new telling of those type of characters, and I think it's really good. I think Bigby is... don't know if he's a top tier character, but he's definitely... This is a story that like fits this type of character, and it works really well. And the Big Bad Wolf is like the perfect, like, stereotypical fable character to use in this type of position, for sure.
Yeah, no, I pretty much did the same thing play wise, where I always tried to be like kind of peaceful and like try to be like diplomatic and breaking things up, and then of course resorting to violence like when either I had no other choice, or like if the other character like was just going like too far or becoming like violent, kind of like, let me just see if I can overpower and put a stop to it now before anything gets carried away. Another thing I really appreciated with the game is how kind of towards the end of the game, after Bigby comes across Bloody Mary and gets shot with the silver bullet and everything, like the doctor pretty much tells him like, look, I know you've done this, thousands and thousands of times before, like, but he's like, if you do this one more time, like, you will die. Like, that's, you're pushing yourself way too far, like, you need to, dial it back a bit. And Bigby's kind of just like, well, how do you think I'm gonna do that? Like, especially in like the atmosphere that we're in now with like the Crooked Man and everything. Like, he's like, I'm in deep. And Snow White kind of just comes across like, well, you just have to. And I think having to like really deal with that and almost like not being entirely sure where the game is going to go with that. I think that kind of added like an extra layer of like, okay, now I have to be really careful with the choices I make, especially with the characters that can kind of make advantage of my weakness. So
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think that it's a game and a story worth experiencing. I think it has a lot of nuances to it, and there's a lot of just great things. One of the better Telltale games in my eyes. I have kind of an asterisk against the Telltale games, just because I feel like they're just really just there for story purposes, not for skill or challenge or anything game related. I think that like it's really hard to lose at those types of games, but I think that
yeah,
this is the one that's worth experiencing. I think that someone or anyone can learn something from these characters, and especially with like the idea of stereotypes and learning to break away from those stereotypes. I think it's a big thing for sure. Um, so if you're done, I guess I'll go to my next one. This one, again, if you know me, probably not a big surprise. But and this is a character that I'm gonna go based on the entire series, not just the new game or the upcoming game, because I think that he doesn't get enough credit for his older games and how he is. I think people like to write him off as a one-off character, but that is Kratos from the God of War series. Kratos is this he's this very painful, grief-filled character who resorts to violence to fix all of his issues, but it comes from hope and honesty and love. And I think that's an underlining detail that a lot of people don't really talk about or reference when it comes to Kratos, I think it's more
right,
apparent with the 2018 game, but I think that's also because he's older and wiser and he has a new family and a son that he has to take care of. But he's had all of that type of stuff, before he became the Ghost of Sparta, before he became the God of War, before he did any of that kind of stuff. I think there's a huge, deep detail to this character, and having to live with his anger and live with his guilt and live with his pain, and having to just try to find a way to release that pain and kill himself, which is Kratos' end game goal essentially, where he just wants to be free of his nightmares and free of it, and that there's no way he can be forgiven. But the journey for Kratos is him learning to forgive himself, and that's an underlying detail that isn't really brought up. But that's essentially what the character's doing throughout all of his games. It's mostly apparent in God of War 3, which released on the PS3. It's on the PS4 now, and which is one of the better games in the series, I would say, especially with the story.
right,
Kratos' hopefulness and perseverance keeps him going, and I think that in the 2018 he realizes to just accept the fact that this is his life. He is who he is, and he needs to take hold of that and understand that his task is greater than the greater good exceeds his own values, and him trying to live his own life in Nordic mythology in the Nordic lands up north
right.
is just really another great character trait of him, is him trying to still overcome his grief, but not in a violent way. He's evolving. He's an ever evolving character. I think Kratos is a very overlooked character. I think people just write him off as an angry guy, but he's so much more than that. And the other podcast that we did, I pitched like an idea for a TV show that revolved around showing Kratos between God of War 3 and God of War 2018, and I think that that I would love to see that, because I think that's the story that would really tell us who he is and give us those underlining details that we don't really get to see and that's never really talked about enough. I think that he's a very evolved, a very nuanced character, and he's just one of my favorites. I love seeing his journey. I love playing those games. And I think that for people who are just jumping in, who haven't played the series except for God of War 2018, they're just missing out of a lot of context. And The 2018 gives a little bit of that context, but I don't know. I guess it's hard for me to understand how you're so emotionally attached to the 2018 version of Kratos when you didn't get to see the other version of it and understand where he's all coming from and who he is as a person, because it's always been there. It's just a very underlining feature, and 2018 just redefines it and brings it up to its purpose. And that, knowing that people love the 2018 version, it makes me more, encouraged to put out the idea to make a show where, even if it's just like a short animated thing of showing how Kratos is as him growing into that type of person, I think that's a really important story for the character.
Right. Yeah, as someone who played about 10 minutes of God of War 1, and that's all I got through in the original series. It's actually a really funny story behind that.
Yeah.
I kind of didn't really have much like experience or connection to Kratos prior to playing the 2018 game, other than just things that like I've read or saw or just like heard from you. But I think just having like the very basic knowledge of like who he is, like still seeing like the journey that he goes through in God of War 2018 of having to deal with I can't remember, but having to deal with his wife's death and really having to parent Atreus, which I felt before the game wasn't really something that he really like did all that much, based off of like kind of the relationship they have early on. Kind of just seeing them like really becoming like much more emotionally connected as a father and son in their journey was something just very like I guess heartwarming to go through. Obviously there's a lot of like very like difficult and almost like tragic things that happen to them throughout the story, but yeah, just seeing kind of Kratos like go through and like beginning to accept the person that he is like throughout the game, and kind of letting go of like all of the things that I guess he doesn't that he doesn't love about himself, but kind of just accepting that the person that he is now is the person that he is. Kind of, yeah, just seeing that whole characterization throughout the game was just really good to see. I'd really appreciate what Sony Santa Monica and Cory Barlog did with the character.
I will add to that. Really, the 2018 God of War, the main aspect of it is just really about second chances. Because Kratos had a wife and had a child before previously, and I think that he didn't have a son, though he had a daughter. So with his culture, he treats that completely differently than how he would raise a son. And I think that with this Kratos, he's foregoing that culture to try something new and different, because this is his second chance at being a father, to have a family, and he wants to keep a hold of that. And I think that for people who have played the originals will mostly get that for the most part and sympathize with the guy, especially with like the other side of it, where the big bad of the game, he's also looking for a second chance, and with his mother, and trying to find that second chance and not being able to accept that he deserves that second chance. Kratos is another character who just doesn't believe he deserves a second chance. So he's really trying to be patient and kinder and more preserved. There's a line in the trailer for the God of War Ragnarok where Atreus says, "You need to be a general, not a father." And Kratos, shouts at him no, because that's where it all went wrong, where he chose to be a general and not a father to his original daughter. And I think that there's a lot of great detail to it that is really shown if you play the entire thing for the series. But I think that Kratos is just a very deep character, and he doesn't get enough love, if you ask me. He didn't get enough love, at least until 2018, when that game came out, and everyone loved him, everyone praised him. But I think that for me, who's been there since the beginning, it's like, this is how he's been. This is nothing like new. This is just a new angle to witness him, a new area, a new chance, a second chance to see him do better, and it's really inspiring to see him do better. And I think that's, for me, it was really emotionally charged because I knew where he came from.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a much more emotional journey for those that know the character and know his past rather than the ones like me who have, not much experience and kind of just jumped in.
If anything, it should motivate those, especially yourself, to play those older games. The only thing
Right.
is, you can't really play them because of they're either on, you have to play it on PS3 or you have to get PlayStation Now, which they're pulling the PlayStation Now cards out of retail stores, so you might not get the chance to really do so anymore. Come February, we'll see. But that's all I got on Kratos. He's just a character. That's always going to be like top 5 for me. Realistically, I don't know where exactly, but that's always a character I look at, and I will always have a lot to say about him.
Yeah, and so this next one is kind of a cheat because it's not one specific character. Is more of kind of a group of characters becoming one, and this one was actually literally, I had no experience with this until about 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
And so my next character that I'm going to talk about is Eidos Montreal's Guardians of the Galaxy. And so playing through the new game, a lot of like the draw and kind of what I appreciate the most about it is the story and the kind of journey the characters go through. Because when you start the Guardians of the Galaxy game, from what I could kind of piece together, it's the Guardians, as far as like a name and a team, haven't really been around all that long. Like we see that they're still kind of shake off their reputations as like murderers and thieves and criminals and all that, and trying to like really rebrand themselves into like the heroes for hire, like, oh, we're the good guys.
Yeah.
And Gamora has just recently joined the team, and we see a lot of like distrust, especially between her and Drax. And like just one of like the funniest things, like throughout most of the game, Drax is always like, oh, the traitor, the murderer, like, this that, and never actually calls Gamora by her name until like closer to the end.
Right.
And like we see a lot of like Peter and like Rocket constantly going at it with each other. And this is obviously a Guardians that aren't quite the Guardians that we know and love. They're still like a very much like, each of them are bringing like bits of who they were as people in the past into the team. And kind of just one of the things that I really loved is there's so many instances throughout the game where we see them like basically like constant, like their relationships like constantly fracturing and none of them ever like really being on terms with each other. And as once you actually start getting through the game and each of them go through their different versions of the promise, that's when like especially after the team more or less saves Drax, is like just that whole idea of them finally coming together and realizing like, you know what, guys, like we can't do this as as Star-Lord and as Rocket, as Gamora, as Drax and Groot. Like we need to do this as the Guardians of the Galaxy. Like there's no more time for us like being not necessarily like conceited, but being like, oh, I bring this to the team and I bring that to the team. Right. It's like, no, like we need to be the team.
Right.
And kind of just seeing just that whole relationship like really form and then becoming the Guardians. I just really loved the different like journeys each character takes. And one of like kind of my favorite things that comes as a result of the Guardians like truly becoming the team is throughout the game, like there's certain like moments where you have to like direct each character to do something, where it's like for Groot, it's like, hey, make a bridge so we can cross this gap, or like Drax, I need you to lift up this object and move it. Once like the team really like becomes one, that function of the game basically gets completely taken out. Whenever you come across one of those like things, like especially for Groot, he'll just go run up and make the bridge for you automatically. And for me, like it actually took a couple times for me to realize that was the game itself doing it, because like I would see Groot go do it and I'd be running across it and I would just be like, wait, when did I tell him to do this? Like I don't remember doing the command. And then after a couple times I actually caught him just running up and do it, and I was just like, oh, okay, that's a really cool thing that they did.
Yeah.
Because that was really showing off like, hey, like you brought the team together and this is the results of it. Like
Mhm.
each character now really trusts like Peter as the more or less leader of the group,
Yeah.
and like Rocket and Peter like kind of really come together as
Mhm.
kind of like the original members of the team, and like they quit like constantly arguing about over they quit arguing over every little thing. And so I just really appreciated what the team at Eidos did with the characters, and um honestly really gave us like better personalizations and characterizations of the characters rather than what we've seen like throughout the MCU and all that. And yeah, I really love that game for the characters, and it was one of those where sitting and playing through it, like I constantly like thought to myself like this is reminding me why I love the characters of games, and
Mhm.
why like the character aspects and the like just the characters themselves like really push a lot of games for me.
For sure. Yeah, I know the characters and the story of Guardians. That's what makes the game. I think that's the thing that stands out the most is the characters and the story. The characters are well defined. They are very. I would say they're more accurate than the MCU when it comes to like comic to source to game to source material or movie to source material. I would say the game's a little
Hmm.
more accurate. Um, I've read some of them, and I just really like a lot of the things that it does. I think that there's a lot of cool like little moments throughout the game and the story that really well define these characters, especially if you go beyond and you get all the collectibles
Right.
and you have the little sidebars in their rooms with the collectibles, and you get to learn a little bit more about each character and what they're about and how they feel. And I think that's a lot of important dialogue that is sadly it's optional, but
Yeah.
I think that it's great, it's new, and it's something that just works. I wouldn't really say this is kind of a cheat thing, um, because I would say Peter Quill in this game really stands out as the best character, um, outside of maybe Rocket, who gets a lot of
Yeah.
characterization. Um, but realistically, like this is a team game, and the team works good here, and it is just something that just comes together in just a really good way. I
Yeah,
think
I
that
think
this is something that is really special. This is something that's really engaging, and it's something new, and it just works as far as a team up type
yeah,
story. It just works.
like one of like speaking on those like optional things that can come across, especially like this game gave me like a lot more like new appreciation for Rocket, especially getting his like backstory and just really how dark it is for his character. Um because like I was only really introduced to the Guardians of the Galaxy like through the MCU and all that. And like I've noticed at least playing through these games and thinking back as they skip like a lot of like backstories on some of the characters. Like especially finding like all of Rocket's little collectibles and like getting his backstory from like his time on Half World and all that. It's like, man, it's like he's kind of has a reason to be the type of like person that he is. Like he
Hmm.
has a very like dark and tragic past, and now he's just kind of doing whatever he wants because he has that freedom.
Yeah.
And another one of like my favorite little moments of the game is I don't think it's necessarily optional, but I think it's when you go to the Nova Corps ship
Hmm.
and you can go through like the criminal files and everything. And as soon as you open it, they're all just like, "Oh, like let me see what they have on me. Like I bet none of yours is bigger than mine and all that."
Yeah.
And as you like go through each like the character files, they're all just like, "Oh, yep, that sounds about right."
Yeah.
And like I think Rockets, he's just like, "Oh, that's all they have on me." He's like, "There's a lot more they don't know about then."
Yeah.
And then like everybody's kind of like dragging Peter. I'm like, "Oh, he probably just has like theft or like something stupid on it." And then you get to his, and they're all just like, "Oh, you you've done a lot actually."
Yeah.
And Peter was just like, "Well, yeah, guys, I've been telling you."
Hmm.
Like I just love that whole thing, just how they all of them just automatically just like constantly doubt Peter and like, "Oh, you're nothing." Like the Ravagers are like that's the only reason like anybody like even knows who you are and knows like not really to mess with you. And then they see his thing and they're all just, "Oh, yeah, never mind, you're one of us."
Yeah, for sure.
Like I think they
There's a
had
lot
that
of
whole
cool things
moment, which
with
was
it.
really fun to see.
I would say the MCU movies also do a pretty good job as far as giving reasons to why the characters are the way they are, especially with the second movie. So I wouldn't go knock off the MCU for that thing, but because a lot of the stuff you see in the Guardians game, again, all that kind of side stuff is optional, and in the game you can add a lot more stuff. But I would say the Guardians movies does just a well enough job in producing that kind of story.
Yeah, for what they
especially
can
for
do.
Rocket. Rocket's definitely the most well-defined character in those movies. It's kind of why he's one of the staple household characters for a lot of people. Him and Groot, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's solid pick. I mean, I think that I can see why it's kind of cheating, but I don't really look at it as cheating. I wouldn't pick it for that reason though, but I think that the whole team just works, and when the team works together, it's, you know, it makes them all like a character themselves. So it's a good option. It's a good pick. It's okay. Okay, this next one is going to go against the grain for what I've been saying for the most part. But this is a character I think about often. It's mostly the reason why I like this game the most in the entire series. It's not a main character. He's kind of a main character in terms of the plot. Like, he's a big part of the plot. But you don't play as him. You don't interact with him that much. But his story just really exceeds itself. And it redefines the story in general for the series. It comes from Dark Souls 2 to be exact. And this guy is King Vendrick, who is the predominant, like, big bad of the story. He's essentially the Gwen of this story, you know. And for all you that know the Dark Souls story, Gwen's the big bad. He's the main end goal. And I wouldn't even say he's a bad guy. That's the thing about this, is that there is no right or wrong. There is only just existence. I think that's kind of transcends in Dark Souls 2. So King Vendrick is, he is the quote-unquote ruler of the land. And he is a character that's, is very much against what Lord Gwyn was trying to promote with rekindling the first flame. Vendrick was very much there has to be another way to end this cycle, to break this, so we don't have to continue this endless cycle of torture and torment and just of existence. And I think that he has this incredible, like, arc that he goes through, and especially for as the player character who's only been told one thing, and that's like, oh, Vendrick's like the bad guy. We have to stop Vendrick. Go see the king and go destroy him. And it's really interesting because you see Vendrick at the end. You get to the end where you defeat his protector, Belfry. I think it's Belfry. And he after you defeat him, you walk down this crypt to his chamber, essentially, where he's at. And you just see this giant mountainous man walking around with a giant sword. And he just has like his underwear on, his undergarments on. And he's walking around like he's this soulless husk of a man he used to be. And you're thinking, well, this can't be the final boss of the game. There has to be something else going on. And then you learn that the daughters of Manus, one of the daughters of Manus to be exact, was controlling him to create a world in darkness. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I just think that his story, there's so much detail in his story arc and his line delivery and who he is as a person, that he just makes the game so much better. He subverts the expectation of what a Souls game can be, where it's not just like, oh, rekindle the first flame. He offers like a choice where you don't have to rekindle the first flame. You can try and do something completely different. And I think that's what's important here with him. I think that he's a character that is just incredibly well made. and well told. He's got a lot of creativity with him, and his whole like I guess theme, or his whole being for existing is there has to be another way to break the cycle of the first flame, so we don't just have to relink the first flame and then everything just continues. He wants a new way of doing things. He rejects the notion that there's only one way to do something, and I think especially for the storyline and the themes of Dark Souls, I think that's a really important thing for that, to bring something new, a new thought process for the players, where you go through the same beats of the game where you have to collect all the Lord Souls to get to the king, to get to Gwyn, or get to the Vendrick, or get to the king, and then you get to him and it's like this can't be it, this can't be right. He's a hollow, he's nothing now. And he doesn't aggro against you, he doesn't attack you, he just walks in circles, and you have to really ponder as a player to think, well, what's the deal here? And then you get to the final ending and you get the choice. And the thing with Dark Souls 2 is they changed the ending for the Skull of the First Sin edition, where in Dark Souls 2 there was only one choice. It was to sit at the throne, which was essentially you make your own world, but it dumbs down to relinking the flame. In Dark Souls, but the thing with Dark Souls 2 is the main thing is once you sit at the throne, you beat the game, relink the fire, you just respawn at the starting bonfire, but it's not New Game Plus. It is the original game with nothing to do. So the big nuance of it is that the only way to really stop the cycle is to just quit the game, which is very, very meta. And I think it's really, really cool that with the original Dark Souls 2 is to stop the cycle and to stop the game is to just stop playing as a player. And I think that's a really meta inspiring motion that the creators of Dark Souls 2 went through, because the notion of Dark Souls 1 is the same thing, where no matter how many times you play through and beat Gwyn, it always restarts you a New Game Plus right away. With Dark Souls 2, the original release, at least, it doesn't do that. With Dark Souls 2 Skull of the First Sin edition, they gave you that more like, if you don't sit at the throne and you walk away, then there's another cutscene that plays, and you decide to walk away from it, which is basically the same type of notion, which is kind of upsetting. But in terms of Dark Souls 3 is a thing, so we have to have that kind of ending. That way Dark Souls 3 can canonically happen. Because if you just quit the game for the original Dark Souls 2, it can't. Dark Souls 3 can't canonically happen because you don't continue the cycle, and you just quit the game. And I think that's very nuanced. And that's kind of what Vendrick was trying to do. He was trying to find a new way. Vendrick got really close. There's an item you can find using his soul, and it's a crown, and the crown negates the hollowing curse, so you can never go hollow. And that's the closest thing he's ever gotten. It mitigates it to a degree, but it doesn't eradicate it. And his whole just thing with trying to stop the flame, trying to find a new way, and I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant storytelling. I think it's a way to subvert the audience expectation and the player expectation of what it means to play a Souls game. And I think that it's why it's my favorite in the series. I think there's a lot of greatness to it. And this is me just barely scratching the surface. There is so much more that goes into this story and this arc for King Vendrick. And I think it's just brilliant. It's just absolutely brilliant.
Okay, yeah. It's a character that I literally know nothing about, so I don't really have anything to comment on. It's more of just, I need to hurry up and finish Dark Souls 1 so I can get to the second game. But that's definitely something very interesting to look forward to as I play through the game and try to pick up on some of those things of Vendrick's story.
Yeah.
But alright. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and jump to each of our final characters, and before I get to mine,
that was my final.
Oh, that was your last one?
That was 5.
Oh, yeah, no, that's right, yeah. Okay, so before I get to my last character, one thing that kind of how I said in the beginning that there was no limits to who we could talk about. That was a little bit of a white lie because I didn't give Patrick any limits, but I gave one to myself to where my list actually has no Knights of the Old Republic characters. It made it kind of hard to figure out the list without that because Knights of the Old Republic is arguably the biggest reason why I love video games and RPGs so much. But if I were to allow myself that, my entire list would literally just be characters from that series. And so that's probably wondering if you've kind of been keeping up with the show and you know how much love I have for that series, why I haven't touched any of those characters, but it was just because I'd be talking about it for an hour and a half or however long this episode goes, and I didn't want to do that. And so my final character will be one who, when I first played the game, I had literally never heard about it. I knew nothing about it. In fact, I didn't even know it was a Naughty Dog game until I was close to finishing. And my final character is Joel from The Last of Us. And so when I first played this game, I was at my cousin's house at the time, and he just had this little disc paper sleeve thing. It honestly looked like some kind of bootleg. I thought it wasn't even going to play of The Last of Us. And I was looking at it and I was just like, hey, what's this game? And they were just like, oh, I didn't really like it, you can take it. And I was just, okay. And so went home, played it, and as most of us know by now, The Last of Us 1 is a very emotionally difficult game to get through. It's easily one of the most difficult game intros I've ever seen, mostly because of what happens, not necessarily of any game difficulty or anything. But so we first meet Joel obviously before everything goes down, where he's kind of presented as this single dad who I think at the time worked in construction, and he lives alone with his daughter Sarah. And kind of the first thing we get is just this little sweet interaction between him and Sarah, where Joel kind of doesn't realize it's his birthday, and as soon as he gets back, she's all excited for it, and she gives him this watch, and he all makes a joke of oh, it's broken. And we kind of just see he's just this dude that's just trying to make things work for his daughter. And then next thing we know, we're thrown right into the beginning of the cordyceps infection, where they're both kind of very confused on what's going on. Sarah's seeing a lot of things happen on TV where an explosion happens maybe blocks down from where she is. And after that, we see Joel kind of run in, and he kind of has to shoot one of his neighbors because he's already infected and he's coming after him. And they take off into, I don't remember what city it is. I think it's Dallas or something like that, maybe Houston. I don't remember if they ever actually said. But kind of right off the bat, Sarah ends up being killed, and the game just immediately jumps 20 years. And so we've now presented with kind of this more older Joel, who's obviously very dark on the world, and he's kind of just doing things just to do things. We end up later on finding out that he has a very dark past, and that after basically the world ended, he kind of just took on this hard on I'll do whatever it takes to survive, no matter who I hurt, who gets hurt. And we find out that his relationship with his brother Tommy is basically broken. And so Joel now in this 20 years later segment is essentially a smuggler, and he works with a partner named Tess. And the game starts with Joel and Tess basically picking up a job from someone named Marlene, who is the leader of the Fireflies, a group that Joel actually kind of sort of joined and worked for, and then eventually left them. And it's during that time in the Fireflies where Joel just became very dark and a brutal person. And because I think there's a couple times in The Last of Us 1 and a few times in 2 where they kind of mention like, oh, like Joel did a lot of bad things, like there's a lot of people that don't like him, but you know he did what he had to, and we see that he basically never talks about it. And kind of as we go through the game, after picking up Ellie, Tess dies basically right after that to help Ellie and Joel escape. And so now Joel is kind of like stuck with this really like annoying 14-year-old girl who kind of like wants to go and do all these things, but he's kind of like, nope, I'm taking you to where I have to take you, and that's it, we're done. Like, I don't want to know anything about you. You don't need to know anything about me. You're just a job. And you know, just throughout the game, like I was just so blown away by seeing how Joel's whole relationship with Ellie changes, because she eventually becomes the daughter that he lost, and kind of like seeing how throughout the game he starts to like put up with her a little bit more and kind of become more like friendly and open towards her, and kind of just doing whatever he has to make sure that she gets to, you know, wherever she needs to go. And especially seeing that dynamic between especially Ellie towards Joel, where she kind of starts to figure out like he doesn't care about her, and you know she's just a job to him. But once they get to the university and Joel nearly dies, kind of seeing Ellie take on like, you know what, like, you know, he's got me through so much, like we're in this together, like I have to like make sure he makes it through. And kind of just seeing the whole thing of her getting tied up with David and the cannibals, and then he coming back to although she fights her way out and survives, he kind of is the one that shows up, and like that's when like I felt we really saw like him starting to really develop a love for Ellie, and kind of like where the father-daughter relationship really starts to form, because that's kind of the moment where I think they both realize that, you know, even though this whole time they've been very like antagonistic towards each other a little bit, that's where, you know, they're really starting to see like, well, maybe there is some sort of like caring relationship starting to form. And you know, Joel's kind of taking on a lot of the hard work to make sure, you know, I keep surviving.
For sure.
And especially getting into The Last of Us 2, where he's kind of very like taken on like the father role, even though there are things in between the two games where we see that they kind of don't see eye to eye anymore. He's kind of more of just wanting to be kind of just that loving father and just be there for someone for Ellie when she needs it. And you know, I think I was more angry more than anything after finding out that Joel dies, just because like personally I wanted the character to keep going. I felt like there was a lot more he could have done, but I think just the impact of Joel being killed and like the very like brutal way that he does kind of mirrored his past, and Ellie realizing that, you know, everything had to have caught up with them at some point. Because of course we find out that the girl that kills Joel, her dad was the doctor that he kills to rescue Ellie before the firefighters the fireflies were gonna kill her to basically like experiment on her brain to try to find a cure. Right. And you know, obviously this decision dooms the it's kind of like the moment where we truly see like, you know, Joel kind of takes on as Ellie is my daughter, like I'm not going to let these people take her from me no matter how good the, you know, intentions are. And yeah, just his whole journey just from going from this very like just dark and like just very like brutal like individual that doesn't care about anyone, to really having to deal with essentially having someone that reminds him of his daughter a little bit, something that he doesn't want to be remembered, or something that he doesn't want to remember really, but really kind of just taking that relationship and the love that he had for Sarah and placing it on Ellie was just, I just love that. Like that whole journey is just it's very emotional, it's very impactful. Joel easily has a place up there with the PlayStation icons, which of course him being dead, not sure how they really want to, and you know, that kind of took him out of being able to be like one of those like flagship like characters, because now it's more on Ellie rather than him. But you know, just being able to start the journey with him and then finish it with Ellie was, you know, just I have a lot of love for the character, a lot of connections with it. Yeah, just overall he's easily one of my favorite PlayStation characters. And yeah, I just really love everything that the team at Naughty Dog did with him.
For sure. I almost put Joel on my list, but I already had Kratos, and they're essentially the same character, so I decided not to do that. They go through pretty much the same exact emotional drive with their daughters, and finding a new, especially with like God of War 3, him having to take care of Pandora and not having that relationship, but him trying to replace, um, like Joel trying to replace Sarah, Kratos is trying to replace his daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and the difference is Kratos tried to take a new approach where he wasn't trying to, he eventually loses Pandora and she dies. Obviously, Ellie doesn't die in Last of Us Part 1. But Joel's actions are very. The thing that makes the game good is the final decision that Joel makes is, was he
Right.
right? Was he wrong? And part of me really doesn't want to agree with him because he's a very selfish character. He does it
Yeah.
for his own personal vendetta, and which, I think like if I was in his shoes I would probably sympathize with him more, but as an outsider looking in, it's kind of hard to, because predominantly he could have ended everything and it would have, and the main thing too, I don't think you didn't really mention it, but she finds out that Joel saved her and didn't let them experiment to
Yeah,
eventually get
that
a cure
he
out.
lied about
And yeah,
like
so that's
saving
why
her and
they
all that.
start, that's the main reason why they grew apart, was because she found out. Even at the end of Last of Us Part 1, it's hinted that she knows he's lying. And I think that's a really, really important staple with it, is that
Right. Yeah.
um, Ellie is very conflicted with, why should I listen to you? Why should I follow you? You've lied to me. And a lot of people get upset with over Joel's death, is that, a lot of people think that he's a beloved character. I don't see Joel as a beloved character. I see Ellie as that
No.
character. She's the
Yeah.
beloved character. She's the flagship character. She's the one who's been through the most out of anyone. Where
Right.
Joel is just trying to replace his daughter, And I think that he's a good character. He's got a lot of great qualities to him, and his journey is really undoubtedly one of the most emotional ones you can go through
Okay.
as a player with a video game. The story is very nuanced, it's very bold, and it's courageous. You go to part 2, it's even bolder, it's more
Mm-hmm.
courageous. Killing off Joel was fantastic. It set the tone right from the beginning of what the story was about. And I think that if you ended the game, what I would say, and you take this with a grain of salt, you or the viewers, but if at the end of the game you ended up hating Abby and just hating the story, you fundamentally misunderstood the point of the story. It's to not be angry. It's to let go. It's to not hold on to things. It's to, when you do a bad things will happen. Like you said, it always comes back to haunt you. And with Joel, it came back to haunt him. And I'm glad it did, because at the ending of Last of Us Part 1, it's hard to, you can understand why he did what he did, but it's hard to agree with him as well. So
Right.
seeing him get killed is both, really sad, but it's satisfying, because, it's hard to watch a person do a bad thing and then get away with it. It's not satisfying for viewers. It's not satisfying for players. At least for me, it's not. Whenever I see someone do a bad thing, I expect something bad to happen to them. And when it doesn't, it's, hard. It's hard in this case because Joel is the playable character. He's the person you experience the story through. But he just gets to get away with this scot-free. No, he gets killed like right away in Last of Us Part 2. And then Ellie has to
Yeah.
learn that Joel didn't want her to make the same mistakes he made when he saved her. He wants her to be mindful and to be not as vengeful or angry, because it's only going to leave you empty and alone. And at the end of the game, she chooses not to kill Abby, but by then she already made the decision to do so. It's too late, and she lost everything. She lost her fingers. She was so blinded by rage and anger and lust for vengeance that it takes her away from like what really matters in the world. I like to make the similarities between her and Frodo from Lord of the Rings. And I had a conversation with one of our other good friends about it, and he was fully on board. He said that's a really good analogy, and that is like, Frodo was blinded because of the ring and the ring's influence on him. He eventually loses his two of his fingers. His ring finger, his pinky finger to be exact, or his ring finger. I think he also loses his pinky too when Gollum bites it, but loses the finger. Once he loses the finger, comes to this realization of, oh, what am I doing? What am I doing? I have to stop this,
Mm-hmm.
And Ellie goes to the same beats where she loses her fingers by taking on this very dark, blinding, rage-filled, hunt where she loses her fingers and she says, I need to stop this. I need to stop this cycle of I do a bad thing to you, they're going to do a bad thing to me. I need to go back and get revenge. And it's just an endless back and forth, bickering. And it's really, really good. That's what makes the game really good. I think a lot of people just, when the game came out, just fundamentally did not understand the point of the story. And I think with Joel, he sends a good message in Last of Us Part 2 with the flashbacks and with before in the final flashback at the end of the game. And I think that Joel is a very, very nuanced character. He's a very great character. He serves his purpose. He's the most conflicting character to dislike or like too, I feel like.
Right.
Whereas, as the playable character, you're supposed to like the guy. You're playing as him. Why would you go through all this time to play as him? But he does these actions, and that's what makes the game so good. Not because, these characters are perfect and are likable. It's because they're relatable. And, whereas some people will say, I completely agree with Joel. Whereas I'll probably sit here and say, well, I don't know if I agree with Joel because I understand why he did it. But what the hell, man? You potentially screwed all of us because she was the cure, potentially the cure, and that's worth taking a chance at. And Joel's blinded violent rage, I'll say, to go save Ellie, he kills the doctor whose daughter goes to kill him. And you have to think, part of you has to believe that, wow, that is justice served for that daughter. That is justice served for her. And it just really weirds me out that people look at Joel and say, I can't believe they killed him. Yeah, but he kind of deserved to die. He didn't do good things. And it came back to him in a very gruesome way. And I really appreciate that that's what Neil Druckmann, the director, that's the direction he went in. It really subverts your expectation of what this type of game is supposed to be. It's supposed to be dark. It's supposed to be grueling. And I think that part 2 is, the more I sit on it, is just absolute, superb, knowledgeable elevation of the first game. It's just so much more than what it was before. I think that because I look at Ellie and I think, you're the flagship. You're like the character we're supposed to feel bad for. You're the character we're supposed to like the most. It's not Joel, it's you, Ellie. And I think that's something that's very different for a video game to do. And then Last of Us 2, Ellie doesn't die, but she's still like the flagship. Like, she's the character we feel bad for because of everything she's been put through because of one man's actions, And that emotional attachment to the both of them is what caused her to spiral out of control. I think that's a big, big part of it. But yeah, no, Joel's a really good character. He's one of the more compelling and critically acclaimed characters because of him changing what a main character can be. He changed just what a main character has to be, and I think that's really important. But yeah, I almost put him on here because it essentially goes to the same thing Kratos goes through, except Kratos obviously isn't as relatable because he's like a demigod, whereas Joel is relatable and he's grounded and stuff. So it works better with Joel for, I guess, the average person. But they go through essentially the same character arc and journey.
Yeah, I think at least looking at the end of The Last of Us Part 1, where, traditionally we're more assuming that if we're playing as like a specific character, they're normally like the good guy of the story and all that. And I kind of, as we go through the game, like seeing all the things that Joel does for Ellie and all that, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
this is a guy who's, coming to terms with, Ellie becoming like a new daughter to him. I wouldn't really say he was trying to replace Sarah. It was more of like a reluctant thing that Ellie ended up filling that void for him. But at least getting towards the end, when
Hold on, it cut you. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
kill the doctors and everything, but she was like, just was something going on?
Yeah, you were like frozen and we're talking. You should be
Oh,
good now.
okay. But yeah, just like how kind of towards the end where I don't fully remember like how exactly the dialogue goes, but Ellie's kind of like, "Oh, like, are you sure? Like, there's nothing else they could have done?" And Joel's just like, "Nope, they couldn't figure it out. There's nothing left." And
Mm-hmm.
then she just goes like, "Okay." Like I think like we kind of like we see a little bit of that like distrust to where like she's not entirely sure like if he's telling the truth or not, but that was kind of the point where after the curtains closed and everything, like I kind of sat there and I was like, wait, am I the good guy? Like, is Joel the good guy in all this? Like, he
Yeah.
kind of just doomed the entire world with that decision.
Yeah. No,
And then yeah, like
it's hard.
when we see Ellie like finding out and her like going ballistic on him, like what good is my life for the world? Like you should have let them like experiment on me. Like why'd you take them? And he was just like, well, I couldn't because like you're my daughter more or less. And she
Yeah.
kind of holds that against him. And yeah, like how you said, that's really where they bridge the gap between them not seeing eye to eye in the second game. And then yeah, same thing. It's especially just with him being the person he was and then killing Jerry, like there's no way that he was just gonna walk away from that. Like,
Yeah.
at this point we find out that like, everybody knows who Joel is.
Yeah.
Um like it's not like he's just some random like, oh, like Jerry just died in an attack on the hospital. Everybody's like, no, Joel killed him.
Yeah.
And yeah, so seeing that, it's um I that I first time through Last of Us 2, like I was not happy with it. I was very like just angry with like a lot of the things that they did, but when I recently went back through it for my platinum playthrough, like I kind of sat myself down and took it as like I've never played this before.
Mm-hmm.
Like let me just go back through, find out, every little thing that I can and see if my opinions change. Yeah, by the end I was just like, wow, I was wrong. Like, Joel, as much as it sucked to see like his death was deserved, it was the vengeance that he basically inadvertently set for himself by killing the doctors and everything.
Yeah.
And it's fitting that in him saving his daughter, he was killed by another daughter.
Yeah.
And yeah, just seeing that whole thing that they go through, and then especially with like Ellie basically like more or less losing the last little piece of Joel and not being able to like play the guitar anymore and all that. It's we really see that she was going down the same exact path that he did.
Yeah.
And kind of getting into the end by letting Abby go. Like she is essentially in both letting her vengeance go and letting Joel go.
Yeah. No, I think it's The Last of Us Part 2. The story enhances everything the first one set out to do, and it's just leagues better. I think that, like I said, if you didn't like it, or not even didn't like it, it made you angry, or it made you upset, or the main thing is like it made you angry, like you just didn't like it. It made you upset, it made you angry, it made you frustrated. It tells me you fundamentally didn't understand what the story was trying to tell you as a person, is to let go of that anger, to let go of all that pimped up energy And I think that a lot of people just didn't get that. Oh, Joel died, my beloved character. Joel's not a beloved character. I'm sorry. He's not a neutrally good person,
And
you know.
plus, I
Whereas
think,
we're made to believe that he is because we played as him. But if you look at his actions and the story beats that he's go through, he's really not. But that's what makes him such a nuanced character, is
yeah,
because like,
is that he's not a good person, but we all came to love him, and then his past, came back, and
yeah,
a lot of people were mad about that, but it's like, he's not a good person. He's
yeah,
not.
he's not, you know, like
Yeah, like,
and it's
he's
just
just one of
frustrating to
those.
see people think that way. But
Yeah, it
I
was
don't
very
know.
just mind blowing to play through a game, like loving this character, and then hitting the end and just being like, wait, was he the good guy? Like,
Yeah,
hold on.
did we
Like,
do
really
something
making
right?
you
Did we do
think, like,
something?
the
You know,
past like 20, 25 hours or whatever, like, you kind of
mhm.
realizing, like, I wasn't the good guy in this story.
Yeah,
Like,
like it does
that's
not feel good
very
to
hard
stab
to
the
do.
doctor in the neck. It doesn't feel
Yeah,
good to do any of that. It doesn't feel right. It feels very
yeah. Because,
frustrating
like,
when
going through it, like, you're in the mindset of, like, oh, I have to save Ellie.
yeah,
Like, like, I went through this whole journey for, like, essentially to the player, like, they're kind of put in the same mindset of, like, I'm going to save my daughter.
yeah,
And then kind
no,
of
yeah,
realizing at the end, it's like, okay, I saved her, but I just doomed the world of the chance of ever being able to recover. And it's like,
yeah.
it's not something a good person would do. Like,
That's also why I say he's using Ellie to replace his daughter, because that's really coming from that. This is my chance to save the daughter that I couldn't save before.
yeah,
He fundamentally replaces Ellie as his daughter. He doesn't want to at the beginning, but fundamentally he
yeah, that
does.
choice.
He not even just he didn't have a choice. It's he chooses to fundamentally replace. That's my new daughter.
No, that's what I
That's
was
your
saying,
new
was that
figure.
choice of making that decision to replace
Yeah.
her is what really makes it. But, crap, I was going to say something now. I can't remember.
But Joel is, yeah, he's one of those very special, intricate characters that really, is something that we look at differently when it comes to video game characters, because he's so different. The entire game's notion is completely different than what we've seen. That's what makes it
Hmm.
so critically acclaimed. Because I mean, realistically, the story of Last of Us Part One is like a 10 out of 10. The gameplay is probably like a 7, maybe a 6 out of 10. Like it just fundamentally works, but it's like not that amazing or spectacular. It's nothing we've ever seen different before. The story is very different though than what we've experienced. And then you
Right.
take Last of Us Part Two, the gameplay is enhanced to like a 9 out of 10. The story is like 11 out of 10. It just enhances it and makes it just significantly better.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a very good look on his character and kind of the legacy that Naughty Dog built with Joel.
For sure.
And, I wonder if there ever is going to be a part 3, which honestly, at this point, I kind of hope there isn't. I think that story is told to the point where there doesn't need to be any more, but of course, that's how I felt about the first one.
Oh, buddy, it's okay.
But, yeah, just I think seeing Joel's story come full circle in part 2 is very, yeah, I think he as a character kind of,
It's okay, bud. It's okay.
it kind of like breaks a lot of the expectations that we normally have for protagonists, because most of the time, like, a lot of the people that we play are like the down and out, like, heroes or whatever, just the person that's wanting to make a difference, while Joel is just someone that wants to survive and do his thing, but is placed in this new kind of environment and new relationships that he has to deal
Yeah.
with. But overall, he's easily one of my all-time favorite characters, especially as far as like a exclusive character. He's one of my top PlayStation ones.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But,
No, he's up there for me too. He's one of the.
yeah,
He's a
just because of
well-written
like
character
what
that.
his, like, the intention of his story, that what they wanted to tell to the players, is something that definitely makes people like think about it, years on.
No, he's definitely up there for me too. I think that I like his journey, and I'm glad it ended the way it did in Last of Us Part Two. I think that it just comes full circle, and I just really like it. I think that Joel is one of those types of characters that just makes it happen. And he's just a different type of character that we don't really get to see in video games.
Right. But
he's almost like a villain that we are made to sympathize with, but he's not the villain. He's the protagonist. He's not an antagonist. So it's a weird take on a video game character, but
yeah, no, I think that's the perfect way to put it. Honestly, he's a villain that we were made to like sympathize with and love.
Yeah,
and we tend to overlook a lot of those things, but by the end of the first one, it really puts us in the chair and like, just really makes us think like, well, were we the good guys in the story? But yeah, no,
to kind of I'll make this real quick, but to make kind of like a parallel, he's a lot like freaking Thanos. Look at Infinity War. I mean, the Infinity War. Thanos is the main character of that movie. He has the most screen time. The story is about him, and at the end of it, we're thinking, was he right?
Right.
Was it justified? It kind of was, because we understand where he came from. We understand his viewpoint, and it's hard to, but he's still the villain, so we're supposed to go against him, right? Then, come to Endgame, he gets killed right off the bat with an axe to the head, and, it's like he did a bad thing. We're not supposed to agree with him, but now the characters have to live with their choice of killing him, and they have to live with, so... It's probably not the best parallel, but because Thanos is just like a crazy madman with the Mad Titan, where Joel is just like a human being with like real emotions. So, but
But yeah, that's about all I have to say on that. So we'll just go ahead and start wrapping up. But yeah, so those were our 5 characters that we just appreciated or loved throughout our gaming histories. It's just something that it was a topic that I thought would be fun for us to both, go through, because the whole point about this show is to be, retrospective on the things that we love about video games and kind of what makes it all happen. I think we had a lot of great things to say for each character. And this is just something that I've always wanted to do, and really you were the best person to do it with.
Likewise, for sure.
Yeah, but with that was our 5 characters that we love. As always, I'm your host Broderick with Patrick and our future third host David. Yeah, that was this episode of Retrospective Gamers. We hope you guys catch us next time.
Thank you so much for joining us again. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Join the conversation. What's your favorite character? Or 5 favorite characters? You name it.
And actually, before we go, I want to make one last little note. I apologize for constantly looking up and down through this whole episode. I have some family things going on today, and I actually also... Well, not I, but I, in part, launched a music video for the band Avenue 1. They're a pop-punk band from out of Merced, California. I've been friends with the singer for a long time. And, on the side as a hobby, I do music photography and all that. And basically, right from the start, the band tapped me as more or less their media guy, so... Yeah, we just dropped a new song and video today called Farron's Creek. It is Fahrens and then Creek, Creek. The band is called Avenue 1. I'd really appreciate you guys to go check that out, give it a like, and subscribe to them as well. But yeah, that was pretty much why I kept looking up and down, was I was trying to push out the episode on all social medias and all that fun stuff. But yeah, Retrospective Gamer, thank you guys.